What's up, everybody? I am joined today with an amazing guest. Ethan Spiezer is with me today, and I am ready to just learn from this individual who dropped around 200 pounds back and forth, just doing the work, and actually eating some pizza alongside with it. And he's going to talk to us today about his journey, his process, and also the beautiful, and I'm talking beautiful, naturally leavened pizza that he makes. Ethan, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
It's great to be here, man. I'm doing good. It's warming out outside here. I'm in Vegas, and it's finally starting to warm up after that month of 50-degree weather coldness we had. That's a joke. I used to live in the Midwest where it was negative 30 in the winter. So this is a walk in the park. My wife's sitting there shivering at like 62 degrees. I'm like, you do remember, right, that like we had to swerve constantly on frozen patches of ice trying to go to the grocery store, right? So yeah, I'm loving it. Out here in Vegas, it's warming up. It's turning into springtime and everything's good.
Lovely. And as a Californian who's been to Vegas in the winter, I remember crying about how cold it was and how my face hurt a little bit, but I don't know. I'm talking to you. I feel like I should just shut up.
No, that's the wife. She's like shivering. She's like, I need the heated blanket. We need to turn the thermostat up. I'm like, it's like 65 and sunny. We're okay. We're all right. But yeah, to each his own. And I got like Hungarian and like Ukrainian roots in me. So I'm used to the cold,
It's in your blood. Cool. Well, welcome to the show. There's always one question that I love to ask everyone when they get on. There's no right or wrong answer. What's good dough?
Okay. So, from a technical standpoint, like speaking about dough actually, and I know it's like, what's up though? But if I was going to say what's good dough, it's dough that's naturally leavened. It's super high in the hydration. But what's good is I'm here talking with you. I'm enjoying life. I'm, in a sunny area, and I'm making pizzas, and I'm getting to talk about them without boring somebody, because 90% of the time I'm talking about pizza, it's like to random strangers at the supermarket, like, oh, don't get the Jack's frozen pizza. We don't want to do that, right? They're like, sir, I don't know you, and please step away from the cart. But now I'm in an atmosphere where I get to talk with somebody about pizza, and they also enjoy it and share that passion. So that's what's good.
Yeah, pizza nerds are welcome here. Pizza talk is welcome here. I love it. I love it. I love it. I brought you onto the show because obviously I was wowed by your beautiful looking pizzas, and I want to learn more about your process. Yeah, no, definitely the credit is due because those are looking mighty fine, if you ask me.
Well, I appreciate that, because I've been making pizzas for about a year now, like regularly in my backyard. And when I started, it was a hot mess. Like I was like, oh yeah, that kind of looks like a pizza, as I'm like holding it away from my eye, squinting sideways head. But now it really does look like exactly what I had set out to do, which was create like a very, very puffy pizza that has that risen crust that's naturally leavened, that I'm making from scratch. So yeah, now I'm real happy with my end results.
Why did you, or how did you get that idea of pizza that you wanted?
So originally I was losing a bunch of weight, right, on a keto diet where I was cutting out carbs, and every single pizza like in the keto world is just so bad. Like it tastes like burnt cardboard with like somehow a chemically aftertaste. Like it was bad. Like I'd go from store to store, like online ordering anything that said keto pizza, and it was just like really, really bad. So I was like, I bet I can do better. So I got in touch with like these alternative flour companies, and I was like making it, so I could have a low carb pizza. And, truth be told, it was so much better than everything else on the market. And I loved it. But then I tasted real Neapolitan pizza, and I was like, there's a better way. So then I was like, okay, I want to eat carbs again. I'm kind of over this. I'm down over 200 pounds, but my body is not enjoying the lack of carbs. I'm working out more. I'm trying to gain muscle. I want some carbs in my life. So I entered back into eating carbs, and then I started to gain weight again. I'm like, oh no, this isn't good. I need to be able to eat carbs in a way that's not going to spike my, insulin levels and such. And I learned all about Neapolitan pizzas made with sourdough. And I was, looking up Una Pizzeria in New York, and their pictures were just amazing. And the process was, pretty guarded. So I was piecing together, what are all these people who are making this amazing, sourdough or naturally leavened pizzas? Like, what is their process? So I'm like picking apart Instagram videos and interviews from all the people who are really good at it, and just slowly piecing it together. And I'm noticing, this has a much, much healthier effect on me than, eating other pizzas. And it doesn't taste horrible like the keto pizzas. And even better yet, it tastes better than normal pizzas that I had, right? Like the sourdough adds this flavor from the fermentation, this like not sour flavor, but more enhanced flavor. Like it's just much more than bland dough. It's a very flavorful and delicious product. So I'm experimenting, and it's just getting better and better. Even now, like I don't really make the same recipe more than 1 week at a time because I'm constantly trying to get it better and better and fine tune it.
I have to say, I do love the complexity of the taste of sourdough. There's different notes here and there that you don't get from just commercial yeast.
Yeah.
I'd love to geek out about sourdough with you, but if I may just grab some information from you, because I imagine there are some people who want to do the ketogenic lifestyle or have done the ketogenic lifestyle. I myself have tried it out, and it's mainly, high fat, high protein diet, lack of carbohydrates, like you mentioned. Would you be able to share a quick successful recipe for a keto pizza?
Yeah, there's like a few low carb flours out there on the market. Carbolose has a really good one through Tova Industries that I love. That's the one I was using when I was making my secret keto dough recipe. Tova Industries has just a really good low carb flour if you're not eating flour. Now, if you're eating flour, it's not good at all. But if you're not eating, carbs, then that's definitely my favorite one on the market. I think King Arthur has a keto pizza dough or keto flour as well. I haven't really tried it much, but there are a few different options. So basically it's use that. And then the key, I think, for keto pizza that nobody knows is you can add, right, vital wheat gluten, right? Gluten itself isn't very high in carbs because it's a protein, right? People don't realize it. So you can take your low carb flour and just chock it full of a bunch of extra gluten, as long as you don't have celiacs, because then you're going to probably like keel over. But if you're not actually like, having celiac disease, you can just load up on that vital wheat gluten, and it gives it like that doughy consistency. That was like a big part of the trick for me to make pizza that kind of tasted actually like pizza as opposed to the cardboard.
Ooh, I like that. Just because every time I made keto pizza, it was like cheese, a lot of cheese, some alternative flours, but it just wasn't anything close to it.
Right. Usually people use almond flour and cheese and egg for the dough. And it's like,
exactly.
That's not pizza though, right? Like the gluten is like the most important part of the pizza, right? You want that developed gluten. Like that's what I'm going for, is that beautiful like spider web structure in my pizzas now. And it's like, you don't have gluten, you don't have pizza. I mean, and even like having a keto low carb pizza, I don't really consider it pizza, but it's a good pizza alternative, right? And but you need that gluten. I think that's key. And I've never seen people really doing it, but if you add just, a few tablespoons of extra gluten to your pizza, that's low carb, then it's tasting like pizza. And then you can add like extra yeast, and pizza flavored yeast or whatever. And, it does the trick.
I was browsing around online and I saw you put out this article on your recipe, and it talked about, using a minimal amount of leaven, and you were using a 1 part leaven, 8 times flour to 8 times water.
Yeah. So what's going on is like a lot of people will maintain a sourdough starter at like 1 to 1 to 1, right? Like, so you have 1 part flour, 1 part water, and then 1 part starter. And you just keep mixing it up every day, doing your feed and discard. In Italy, with like their pasta madre, like they do a much drier version of it. It's like in the States, we do like a liquid sourdough usually. And then in Italy, it looks like they have this much, much stiffer product. But it's the same idea. It's the same thing. You have flour and you have water, and then you're just snatching yeast out of the air and then, incorporating that. Like that's what this is, regardless of the, level of stiffness that you have or the hydration level of your culture. But what I do is I take that culture, that sourdough starter, and then I use just a little bit of that to build up my leaven, right? And in doing so, now I can use a lot of this pre-ferment. Like if it was 100% hydration, that's a poolish, right? So if I use this poolish that doesn't have yeast, it's powered by sourdough. Now I can use 50% of the recipe is this pre-ferment. But if I use that starter at just like a 1-to-1-to-1, it would be disgusting. Like it would be so sour tasting, or it'd be so overdone. But by using just that little bit of the starter to build up this leaven, I now have this product that's got so much of this naturally leavening agent in it, but it's not that overwhelming, I squirted lemon juice all over my pizza flavor. So that's really cool.
And by increasing or decreasing the amount of leaven, you prolong the time for that leaven to be built, right? It's not going to happen as quickly.
Yeah. So by putting like just a little bit of starter into like my 100% hydration poolish or my leaven or whatever you want to call it, and it's interesting because I've had a lot of blowback if I'm like, oh, I'm making a biga or I'm making a poolish with sourdough. They're like, no, you must, I'll have like these people come out of the woodworks. No, it has to have baker's yeast to be considered a biga. I'm like, yeah, no, it's just a pre-ferment based on hydration ratio with yeast, but it doesn't matter if you're getting that yeast from a natural source or even like wild yeast that you're making from fruit. Like you're just using yeast and then a certain amount of flour and water. Like that's all we're dealing with here. And so people will get very worked up and try to tell me, no, you can't call it a poolish or biga. That's why I just call everything 11, because everything technically is 11. So you can't get mad at me for calling it that. But
can't get all technical.
Yeah. But by using just a little bit of that starter, right? Like you end up with this very slow, fermenting product. So I'll let my, biga go 48 hours before I even mix it with the rest of the final dough. Or I'll let the poolish go like 16 to 20 hours on the counter, just growing slowly. Like, whereas my starter, it peaks in like 6 to 8 hours, but my poolish can go like 2 or 3 times that before I'm ready to use it, before it's at its peak. So it's really cool to just have that slow development of the flavors and such.
Let me ask you this. If you were to use the small amount of starter, but you increase the heat, would it have a change?
So the hotter, process? So like the hotter the ambient temperature is, the more activity you get. So I do a lot of controlling of the growth specifically to slow that down or speed it up. So there have been times where in Vegas here, I've been like, okay, I want to see what happens if I stick it in my garage where it's like 91 degrees. And then I'm going to have one in my wine cooler at 64 to kind of have a comparison and make both dough identical and do the comparison. I really like using the wine cooler at like a solid 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Like that seems to be the sweet spot for the dough ball rising as well as the pre-ferment building. So that 64
what were the
degrees
differences
Fahrenheit.
in taste? What were the differences in taste between the two?
The warmer growth is sour. It's more sour flavored, right? So my wife loves it. Like when we have like a warmer dough that was risen in hotter temperatures, or the pre-ferment was, like she loves that sour, really, really acidic taste. Whereas I want that very, very light and mild and just like a hint of something special in there.
Okay, good to know. So what is the recipe that you're working on now, or what? Because like for starters, like not every sourdough pizza is going to look the same, but
yeah,
the reason you stood out to me was because you have this poofy, airy crust. Kind of, I when I see it, like I hate putting people into a box, but it kind of reminds me of Canotto style.
Yeah, no, I mean that's what it is. That's exactly what I'm going for. I'm like, I want that contemporary Neapolitan pizza that like the new generation of chefs in Naples are bringing up. Like.
What does Canotto mean? Does it mean contemporary?
No, it's just the style. Like they're kind of used, I think, synonymously. Like contemporary Neapolitan pizza is like that Canotto style. It's when you have that overly, like hyperbolic almost crust where it's just like over the top and it looks like beautiful and it's aesthetically pleasing. But, a lot of people, like I post my pizzas online and by and large, everybody's, very, very nice about, very complimentary with their reactions, but I get, a certain crowd who just hate. I mean, like, they fervently hate it. They call it a donut. They call my pizzas a tire. They, say that's a hemorrhoid pillow. They're like very, very graphic and like there's this level of emotional disdain for what I'm doing. I'm like, whoa, I'm just like making pizzas that I'm not even selling. Like, people will be like, how could you dare sell that? I'm like, I'm making them in my backyard, right? Like, people want to buy them, but I'm not selling them right now. Hopefully one day I can, sell some pizzas. But right now I'm just making them for friends and family and to showcase. But people get very, very emotionally invested in not liking this style of pizza. And I think it's interesting because had I never, tasted this type of pizza or tried it, I probably would have felt, I wouldn't be this haterade level of extremeness, but I would probably be like, yeah, that's not for me, because the dough consistency is so radically different than like what I was used to as an American eating pizza growing up. And I grew up in the Midwest. So like, we had good pizza. Like, I was very much a fan, not so much of like deep dish, but of like that bar style that, we had all over the Midwest. Like, it was really something we could get anywhere, and it's good pizza, but it's so much more dense. And I like New York style, but it's so much more dense. Like, even Detroit style that's higher hydration is so much more dense than what I'm doing with these pizzas. And it's that lightness. It's like, I kind of equate it to like a Krispy Kreme donut. Like, if you've had a Krispy Kreme donut, it like dissolves in your mouth. So like, that's what I'm going for in my texture, and it's just very recently that I've really started to achieve this, where it's like, I feel like your teeth make it disintegrate upon contact. Right. And it has to do with hydration, but that's just a piece of it. And people don't understand that. So like, I could do 100% hydration level dough that would be stiffer than a 72%, because the W index of your flour, like the strength of it, is so important for how it absorbs the water. It's not really the whole picture to be like, yes, I have an 80% hydration dough. It's like, yeah, but you use like Manitoba flour that's 400 strength, and like, it's still hungry and still thirsty for water. So like, that's something new that I've discovered. So I've been going weaker with my flour, but higher with my hydration. And like, it just makes this dough that, as long as it doesn't end up all over my fingers, and I actually get it into the oven, it's like a gourmet product, and it's awesome.
Okay, just a couple of things before I ask my next question about your W flour today.
Yeah.
Number one, I love the Krispy Kreme comparison. Huge fan of Krispy Kreme. Fresh, warm, even microwaved for 5 seconds afterwards.
Or, even cold from the back of the car from 2.5 weeks ago, and I forgot it was back there. It's still good, right?
You and me both, okay? So, like, here's the thing. Light equals less calories. Airy equals less calories. And that kind of just goes back to, like the journey that you've been on. It's like, you lost all this weight. You're not trying to gain it all back, but you're trying to gain the right the right amount of nutrition back for your new goals of building muscle.
Yeah.
You need some carbs. You don't want to go overboard.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah. That's it. And it's the timing too. Like, I try to eat my pizza after the gym. So it's like, I wake up in the morning, have a couple protein shakes throughout my day. I'll go to the gym after work. Then as soon as I'm home, like, I'm texting my son from the gym, like, all right, turn on the pizza oven, because when I come home, it's go time, like, I'm in between sets, like, all right, get that pizza oven fired up. He's like, okay, Dad. And so then I come home, and that's how I carb up after my workouts, is with, these pizzas. And it's going to be, 80% of my daily carbohydrate intake from this pizza, and it has a purpose, and it's serving that purpose when I eat it. So it's like the fuel that I use to help myself throughout the day.
It's a great way to just have balance in your life and not overdo it. I think the second thing is that this is a very like niche product. I totally agree that some pizza makers, I have one in particular, I'm not going to drop his name, but he was like, people pay for pizza, not crust. And I was just laughing because, like, yeah, you can't just serve people like little toppings unless like there is, unless that is the product. He was more referring to us like making sure that we stretched it all the way out to the edge and got a good distribution. But when your product or the pizza that you're making is really there to show off this beautiful airy crust, then you got to come into it understanding that that's what you're paying for. And to make.
Much to the defense of these people who have that, kind of stance, like, they don't understand I think, largely what the crust is, because you're basing it off of like your experience, even your experience with Neapolitan pizza. Like if you've had the good Neapolitan pizza, but it's like AVPN, like the regulated, like these are the authorized Neapolitan restaurants, like they're never going to be high hydration like that. You've never tasted something that's 80% hydration. You don't know what that is. You've only tasted these pizzas that have been fermented 8 hours maximum, right? Not certainly 72 hours, so it's just a different product. So you're basing your knowledge, that prior knowledge is based off of a different product. So it's very hard to compare. It would be like trying to describe Krispy Kremes to somebody who's only ever had Edamons, right? Like that's a good donut, I guess, but it's definitely not the same thing. Like it's a totally different texture and experience. So you have to understand what that is. So and it's just really, I've just been scratching the surface of it like in the past month or so as I've been upping the hydration and lowering the strength of my flours. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been thinking I was doing, but I wasn't until now. Because when you just taste a crust that just dissolves in your mouth, it's a totally different experience than one that you have to like fight and chew through. It's just, it's awesome.
I love that 100%. Let's go back to that question that I had earlier about like, what W factor are you looking for now in the different stages? Because I have a feeling you might be using a different flour for building your leaven and then a different flour for making the final dough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So like this is where it starts to border on like mental illness for me when it comes to the pizza making, because I'll have like right now I'm using 4 different flours from 4 separate mills, right? All imported Italian flours that I'm using for different stages of it. So it's like, okay, for my pre-ferment, I need my W for, this product or whatever I'm making. I need that to start off at 330. But then I have to average it down, right, to a grand total of like 290. So then I have to get these other 2 down. But I want to use some of that soft wheat that's harvested at a certain time of the year that gives me the puffy crust from this mill. But that's a little too low. So now I'm going to bring it up from this one. And it's like this gentle balancing act. And, I have like a few different blends down. And probably I could just use one flour if I could find it, but I have yet to find one that, does what I want. I would need still 2, one for the pre-ferment and then one for the refreshing. But even still, I need 2 at least in each step just to get it exactly where I want it.
Can you just break that down into a little bit more detail? Because that was, to me, super insightful, but also very general. So I would love to hear more.
So, okay. So like, for example, let's use Caputo, because I love a lot of the Caputo flours, right? They have the Navala flour that they use and a Navala Super, right? Navala has a W of 260 and the Navala Super has a 330. So 330, that's for a lot longer of a leavening time. So using that in the pre-ferment, right? So let's say I'm just using those 2 flours. They're a very puffy crust. They're harvested at a specific time of the year so that it just contributes to this fluffier end product. So let's say I'm just using those 2, because that would be a very great starting point for someone who wants to make that Canotto style pizza and wants to make it with a pre-ferment like I do. You use that 330, that stronger flour, it can absorb more water. So it can ferment longer, right? So I can do 100% poolish with it, right? I'm going to do 100% hydration poolish by doing 400 grams of flour, 400 grams of water, and it's the Navala Super. And then let's say I'm going to let that sit for 20 hours before I've even mixed my final dough. Okay, now that's risen. I've used, 5% sourdough starter, 5% of the entire recipe's flour, right, in that starter or in that leaven, that poolish to grow. After 20 hours, I mix that in with the rest of my flour. I mix that in with the salt and with the water to get to the hydration level I want it to be. And now the second flour that I'm adding to that, that's going to be weaker because that doesn't go as long, right? And it's balancing out now, and I'm not at 260. I'm not at 330. I'm right in the middle.
So what is your, I guess, ideal W value if you were to average it out?
And then that is like a tricky question too, because it's not just the W index, because different flours absorb differently, right? Like, so I might use some type 1 flour, right? Now that's a 240. but that's like the thirstiest flour there is. If I add just a little bit of that, I can up my water so significantly because you have that bran and that germ right in there that absorbs the water too. So the W is important, but again, like that's not everything. There's not one thing that's the end all be all. Like I used to think it was just hydration until I made like a W400 hydration pizza at like 80%, and it was so dry and it like, wasn't sticky at all. I was like, okay, so, and that kind of was what started to have that eureka light bulb moment. But like ideally, I think you want it around 300. I think the higher W's of like 350, 360, that's really bread flour, right? Like that's really what you need for bread. You want the weaker flour. As weak as you can go without restricting your leavening time. So like I have a flour that's got a W index of 200, but if I use that, it can't even make it 24 hours before it's, just slop, right? So it's all a piece of the puzzle, but I think right around 300 with a flour that can handle the water is pretty good.
Wow, that was a great paradigm shift for me. Like, it's like more and more every day I learn, and it's like it's so true. Like the flours that you'd use, it's just not one little piece. There's so many different pieces to the puzzle.
Yeah.
It fits in certain different ways.
Yeah, and you gotta learn like their personalities. Like all these flours are so individual. Like I've been using a lot of Pacini flour lately, and it's so much more like a paper thin type of end crust compared to what I had been using. But I like everything, and that's why I kind of like taking a little of this mill, a little of this mill, because I want all these attributes combined in a flour that doesn't exist, and that's why I'm making my own. I'm like, okay, I got 4 or 5 different mills combined together here to make this flour that's overly complicated, but I love it, so we're gonna work with it.
Let's talk about how you incorporate water. Are you using a mixer or are you hand mixing these?
So about a year ago, 6 months ago, I told my wife, this is what I want for my birthday. And I sent her, an Italian spiral mixer website, like as a joke. But then my birthday rolled around and there it is on the counter, right? So she's like, well, you've bought me, diamonds and such, and like I never bought you anything. So here's your one big ticket item, right? So I use the spiral mixer exclusively, and I love it. I love it. It's just as important, I think, as the pizza oven. Before that, when I was using my KitchenAid mixer, like there were lots and lots of swear words that accompanied the process of making my dough because it would get too stuck to the sides of the mixer or would be not spinning right, and I'd have to let it sit and rest and calm down for 30 minutes, then knead it by hand to finish the process just to get it to where it was. So now that I have a spiral mixer, it does the whole shebang in like 30 seconds compared to 30 hours. I mean that's not true. It's about 5 to 20 minutes to mix my dough from when I put it in the mixer to when I pull it out. But yeah, it's a spiral mixer all the way. I feel like that's where it's at. And honestly, before I had the spiral mixer, I had given up on a stand mixer, and I was using just a pulser. Like I was using a food processor to mix it. Very, very quickly because I couldn't get the type of spinning that I needed from the stand.
Okay, so that is my life right now, right? I stopped using the food processor because I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. But then I bought a stand mixer. I returned it because I just didn't think it was doing the job. No. I bought a FAMAG last year.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's going to come March 25th. That is what they've quoted me.
Yeah, that's what I use, and I just love it.
I am excited. I'm so ready for it. I'm so over taking like 8 hours for my dough to be ready.
Yeah.
But where I figured out the no knead kind of stretch and fold and coil fold method,
mm-hmm.
I haven't figured out a easier process for incorporating water after a biga.
Okay, so
did you?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things you can do. So one thing that's going to be very, very helpful if you're using a biga, because the worst part about it when you're mixing the dough is you have like these clumps of it, like these chunks within your end product. You're like, no, why? Like I can't. I keep on kneading and kneading and they won't stop. So what you want to do is you want to take the rest of the water that you're going to be using, save for maybe like 30 milliliters or whatever, like almost all of the refresh, and then sit the biga in it for 30 minutes before you mix. Just let it sit in there.
Sure.
So that softens the biga up considerably. And then it's going to hydrate it before you mix it. So then you can take that out of that water. It's been sitting and soaking and softening up. You just, break it into little pieces and then mix that up with the water. But it's really important to hydrate it. Otherwise, what I do is you want to do that autolysis or autolyse. I'm not exactly sure on the pronunciation. I don't know how to pronounce any of these words, but I know how to read them, so it's okay. But you take your water and your flour of the refresh, and you just let that sit together for like 30 minutes or an hour, like mixing loosely, kind of like you would a biga. You're not going to make a full dough out of it, but you just want to incorporate all the water in there. Maybe mix it just a little bit more than you would that shaggy biga. But you're going to take that, and you're just going to have that as the other 50% of the flour. So now you have 50% that's your biga, and 50% that's the water flour. And then that mixes so much easier than just adding the water and the flour as another piece separately.
So it wouldn't be 100% biga.
Nope, that would be 50%, right? Which is actually my preference, to do a 50% that way. Yeah. But
just to go back to the 100% biga then, like soaking it in water, I have found works better, but then like you're still left with puddles. How are you mixing that all? How are you fully incorporating the water after?
So when you're
just kneading,
when you're putting it in the water, let me ask you this: do you like put the whole thing in the water, or do you take scissors and chop up little pieces?
So I've done it a couple ways.
Okay.
So what I've been doing is sometimes I will take the biga and then run it through the food processor and then dump the water in and then knead. I don't know if that's bad. I stopped doing that because I was still getting clunks.
Yeah.
And then lately, you know what? I've only done it successfully once, but I think it was just a matter of time and like letting it sit in the water and then kind of balling it together.
So like I think
it just took it took a long time.
So I think your best bet is going to be to let it sit in that water. Just let it chill. To get it as hydrated as you can, like maybe 45 minutes, an hour or so before you're mixing it. Then you're going to mix in everything you can. The rest of the water, whatever salt you have towards the end, just mix. Then once you're done, because you're not done, right? You still have clumps. Then you're just going to set it on the counter covered for 30 minutes. Then do nothing, just walk away, go play some video games, watch a show, take a shower, whatever. Come back 30 minutes later and then hand knead it the rest of the way. And that's going to be a much, much better process, because then it's going to give it time to relax. And that gluten network's kind of developing up and it's helping you. And then when you go to mix it, it's so much smoother because it's less that clumpy and it's more relaxed at that time. And also I find that even if you have, just a few little pieces left over when you're doing it that way, once you put it in the fridge for 24 hours, it kind of just all chills and melts into itself. Like I like that 24-hour or 48-hour cold time after I've mixed the biga if there's any pieces. One, because it's developing flavor and then you're really having a delicious dough. And two, because those last little bits kind of go away by the time I make my ball. Because I kind of break the mold, I think, a little bit, whereas I take my dough out of the mixer and either do, some stretch and folds, like maybe 8 or so, and then let it sit for 30 minutes. Or alternatively, I usually just shove it right into the fridge. Like there's nothing happens. I don't have any like room temp bulk ferment. I take my dough out of the mixer and straight away into the fridge. And then I ball it up out of the fridge. And every day for like 5 days, I'll be taking out 1 or 2 balls worth out of this, tub of dough. So like my dough usually lasts up to, like 120 hours. So every day I'm pulling out a little bit of it at a time, but I'm not balling all of it up at once. But as I'm fine tuning my recipe, my window is actually shrinking and each pizza is getting better.
Okay. I like that. I like that you're bulking everything and just kind of grabbing a little bit of what you need at a time. And then I'm guessing letting it come to room temp and fermenting on your table.
Yeah.
What I wanted to comment on is that every time I did a biga only dough, I do it same day. It's because there was one time back in February of 2021 where I did a biga only recipe and it worked for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it was hot that day or whatever, but like, I was like, oh, this was my lifesaver. This was my extra dough that I needed. And so I tried to replicate the process, but every time I would just get bits and pieces and the whole storing it in the fridge overnight. I'm going to try.
And, the other thing that's really nice about that too is like, okay, so 24 hours later, right? You pull out your dough ball and you try it. You're like, oh, that's pretty good. But also the day you mix it, save, 2 dough balls worth before you put the rest in the fridge and try it that night. Then the next day, pull out another one, compare it. Oh, which is better? Then the next day, okay, here it is at 48 hours. Okay, here it is at 72 hours. And then you can kind of compare each different day, and you can see the subtle differences in flavor and how the dough handles. And you can, kind of make note of, oh, okay, like the current poolish I have, it's the first 24-hour dough that I've ever loved. Usually I like the same day dough or 48 hours, but I have this new poolish, with every different variable in play or whatever, that for whatever reason at 24 hours, that's when it's the most beautiful and the most delicious and, the puffiest. And so it's just interesting to note, okay, what are these differences in each recipe and when do you want to use them for the ultimate, in terms of flavor and texture.
What is your process for comparing them other than taking them out at different times? Because for me, sometimes I try to do that, but it's hard for me to notice it, maybe because it's so subtle or I'm in a different mindset that day. Do you have anything for that?
Well, and for the longest time, I think my recipes were using a little bit too strong a flour. So it wasn't very different each day because like all my flour was like at 350 and above. And so every single day I'd be taking it out. It wasn't that much different until I noticed that it no longer worked. I'm like, okay, it's, day 7 and now my dough is, very, very flat pulling it out of the oven. So 7 days, okay, that's a little too much, right? Like that was the only difference. But now I'm really focused on the texture of my dough. The flavor's always good. Like my culture, for whatever reason, tastes delicious all the time. So I'm very happy because when I lived in Illinois, I had one that was not nearly as good as the Vegas one. So I don't know if it's out here, it's just better or something, or I just am better and I'm maintaining a healthier starter because I'm more, feeding it on a regular schedule and all that. I'm not sure what the reason is, but for whatever reason, it always tastes good. But the texture is really where I'm trying to figure out what's what, because so many times I had like a gummy consistency, or it would be too burnt or cooking too fast or what have you. But now I'm really focused on that texture. So that's what I'm looking at when I'm biting these pizzas, is like, am I fighting it to chew it, or is it, like I said, that Krispy Kreme dissolvable, solvent of a dough, like, is it just dissipating upon, bite? So that's really what I'm looking for. And as I'm really trying to, nail down that perfect consistency, my window is shrinking because I'm only getting that for 1-2 days. It's usually, outside of that 48-hour window, the dough doesn't do that. It's still good, right? But it's not that perfection that I'm looking for.
Wow, so interesting. We've talked a lot about fermentation in this conversation, and I think we can move it along to just like, what are you doing once it's at its peak or once you're ready to bake? How are you stretching that thing, and maybe talk about your cooking conditions too?
Yeah, so what I'm doing, like, and I generally am just making margaritas. Like my sons, they'll want toppings of various, but like I've always been of the mindset that until the dough is perfect, I don't really deserve to be experimenting with all this stuff. Like I want the perfect dough. And it's kind of like the same standard I judge at like pizza restaurant by. Like there's this spot here in Vegas, Yukon Pizza, that has a 124-hour naturally leavened sourdough heirloom starter that's been passed along generations. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go try this place out, because generally I'm, kind of not impressed with pizzas. So I go to the spot and I order just a cheese pizza, and I'm like, okay, their flavor is actually good. Like, this is a delicious dough. Okay. So then the next time I went back there, I'm like, I'm going to try these different flavors. But for me, myself, I'm like, I don't have my flavor or texture like exactly perfect. And then once I do, then I can start experimenting with everything else. But for me, I'm generally just making those margaritas. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my dough ball out, and it's getting completely, dancing around in flour, like the bench flour, to make sure I can handle it. And I use flour that, isn't going to stick to it. It just generally brushes off or whatever. But yeah, I'm using my bench flour, and then I making sure it's fully coated. And then I'm pushing it all around, making sure to leave a little air trapped into that crust. And then I'm using my hands in kind of like a wax on, wax off Mr. Miyagi motion, right? Where I'm like kind of just stretching the dough out like that in gentle little rubs back and forth. And then I'm using my fingers to just stretch it out as much as possible. And then I stretch it over my hands, but not the center at this point. I'm literally just going around the rim and like I'm stretching the rim of it out to open it up, because I'll have the complete center open, but then it'll be kind of bunched towards that big puffy crust. And then I just push that out overhead, flop it down, and the whole thing takes about 30 seconds start to finish. And if it takes longer than that, I generally have botched it. So it has to be quick with the high hydration. Now, if I'm using, like 70% hydration, then it's more of just like standard what you would see with trying to do like some slap and folds or whatever, or just slapping the dough. But yeah, with the high hydration, you have to be quick, because if you overwork that dough, it's not going to be nice to you. You got to get it completely opened up, fully dressed, and like onto the peel within about a minute when you're dealing with a weaker flour and 80% plus hydration.
Thank you for reminding me what the hydration was. So what would you say is your pizza size and diameter, and then your dough weight? And then if you can talk about how much of like space you leave for pushing out the air before you stretch out the edges.
Sure. So the end pizza is going to be like between like 11 and 13 inches usually. Like that's the size like a personal pizza. And I was using my rock box forever, so that's kind of where I got accustomed to that, because I really couldn't do more than 12 inches. Now that I have my dome, I'm starting to kind of see how big we can go. But yeah, generally, I'm eating a full pizza myself, so really about 13 inches diameter, that's about perfect for me. So I'm leaving about 2 inches around on the crust, maybe an inch and a half or so, before I stretch it out, and then I try to get it to like a half an inch. But I want to have a lot of that air trapped in there. So I'm very careful when I'm migrating like the dough to the sides and pushing it out, that I have, like a big giant round bubble kind of on the outside. And then if that bubble in parts starts to like get too loose, then I'll just pop it real quick. And it's real interesting. I haven't seen anyone do this. And it's actually probably the most stressful part of my pizza making. But if I start to see like a giant bubble forming in the rim of my crust that I know is going to be like a black charry over bubbly spot, what I try to do is I pinch it, and pop it so that there's a hole, and then instantly cinch it or pinch it shut after leaving out just a little bit of air. So it's like the whole thing is I have to poke a hole in the crust and watch it deflate for like a millisecond, then shut it again. So I just let out just the right amount of air. And I've not seen anybody else do that, and it's probably overly complicated and too stressful, but it really helps to make sure I don't have any bubbles. Ideally, I don't have that bubble situation going on, but I often do with the high hydration. So when I see like one giant circular bubble forming in my crust, I try to like just pinch a hole in it. And then as it's like a deflating balloon, I catch it and then I shut it so it's even to the rest of the crust. And I don't know if that makes sense as I'm explaining it. That might be something you'd have to see, but it's a very stressful part of the pizza, because if I poke the hole and I don't get it, then it's all flat and I know that part's not going to raise, so there's a...
Got it. So I just, and then, sorry, what was the dough weight? And then my second question was, how do you, when you're stretching around, how do you prevent the crust from deflating?
Sure. So, the dough weight is around 320 grams per dough ball, which is like on the higher end of what I've seen for these personal Neapolitans. But you got to also remember, I have higher hydration, so there's less flour. If you have a 50% or 60% hydration, there's more flour total. So I have to go a little bit higher for the same amount of flour in my pizza, if that makes sense. Yes,
yeah, absolutely.
So I do 320 grams. I started off at 280, then I went up to 300, and now I'm all the way up to 320. And as I was increasing hydration, it was 280 like in the 60s, and then when I hit like 70%, I went up to 300. And now that I'm at like around 80%, I think I'm usually right around like 78, 79% per pizza. But now 320 seems to be that sweet spot. So yeah.
And then the stretching, like when I feel like whenever I get to that point of now I'm ready to stretch over my hands, I feel like I may be doing some damage to the dough, to the cornichon.
Yeah. So yeah, you have to be very careful. So like my fingers, I don't touch the rim of it really, but I'm right pressed against where it is. So the rim's like sitting right outside my fingers, and then I'm turning it. And I try to note where I start the turn, because it'll be like a 360 degree rotation. And then after that, it's overworking the dough. So I try to just go around it one time. And as I'm going, I'm just stretching out just from the rim. So the rim is getting stretched further. So it's not bunched up, because the worst thing you can do when you're making the big puffy Canotto style crust is have too much dough trapped in the rim, because then it's not fully airy, it's not light, and you don't get that beautiful spider web. So you need to make sure it's not bunched up, but you still need more dough at the end. So the best way I can do that is by pushing it all out and then doing a final stretch where I actually am stretching just the rim of it.
Okay. Love it. And then just the cook time, like what temperature, and are you aiming for a certain time?
Yeah, so there's the $1 million question. And that's the one thing like I really am trying to figure out. So far, around 750 to 800 degrees is that sweet spot, with like a little space between the flame and the pizza itself. So I don't want it too close, but I want the flame, very high, so that it dries it out and it puffs up the crust almost instantaneously. But around 750 to 800, that's that sweet spot. And then I cook them for around 2 minutes. If it's a little hotter, it'll be a little less. And if it's a little colder, it'll be a little more. And being out here in Vegas, like some days it'll be so windy. I live right out by the mountains on the outskirts of the valley. So like it'll be very, very windy. And the flame can sometimes be like whipping back and forth from that. And so then it's really about taking the wheel and just turning it and trying to, play against where the flame is dancing to, it's kind of like a little mating dance between the flame and the dough.
So fascinating. It's so lovely to hear someone else's perspective on pizza, the type of effort, because I will admit it, you put in so much more effort in pizza than I do. And it's so refreshing to hear how you do pizza to a certain level. It's cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like, I, I'm all self-taught at this point. Like I'm watching videos and picking apart what I see. I'm like, okay, that's what they're doing in Naples. Oh, that's what they're doing in San Francisco. That's cool. Okay, that's what they're doing, over here. And I'm just trying to take and piece together all these little bits to form my own style. I'd love ideally to, train under some great, maestros and some great pizza chefs. And, I might be doing that sooner than later. And talks with some people, and that's really cool. But as of right now, like I'm totally just an idiot here experimenting, and who's totally way luckier than I deserve to be with what I have. Like I never thought I would be anywhere as advanced as I am in the whole process at this point, and getting the type of responses from people. Like my heroes, like the top pizza makers, in the country, I'll send a couple pictures to, and I'll be like, hey, I'm just a fanboy of pizza, and like I really appreciate what you're doing. Here's what I'm doing. And then they'll be like, oh man, that's fantastic. You should come on out to the Pizza Expo and meet me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. Like I can't believe I could get that reaction, based on just following something that I love and not giving up on it. It's really cool.
Are you going to Pizza Expo?
Yes, I am. I will be in
right
attendance.
There.
What's that?
I said, you're right there.
Yeah, I'm right there. How could I not? And, I went and I signed up, and it was like within the first week of it, I was like, okay, got all this money together. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to work up the nerve to actually compete in like the non-traditional, competition. And that was the only one that was sold out. And I was like, no, I can't actually compete. But now I can just walk around and get my fanboy on without becoming overwhelmed. So
you couldn't do traditional with your style?
I could, but like it wouldn't be doing my pizza service. Like I really want to have that super hydrated, super puffy crust for people to really see what's up. Like I can, and I make a mean Neapolitan that's, got the smaller rim and lower hydration. But like my sweet spot, like where I think I excel, is really this ridiculous, overblown, delicious, like Michelin star level pizza. I love the traditional pizza, and I can do it, but that's, I don't think, really my expertise, so to speak, if I'm an expert at anything.
I'd have to see. Right. I mean, I'd have to see what the description is for traditional, but I'm just confused as to whether or not you could fit your pizza into quote unquote traditional.
I'm assuming it's like AVPN regulations, which is maxing you out at like 62% hydration. And it, specifies your rim has to be, only yay tall. If that's what it is for traditional, then, like my pizza definitely would be just disqualified upon baking it, not that it's not great.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. What's what?
I haven't read it, but I just assumed that traditional meant something a little bit different, but
Yeah, it
clearly
may,
I
and it
didn't read the
may.
description. Okay. Well, I mean, it's worth checking out. I would love to see you compete with that and kill it. Um, I guess my question is then, what is next for you in terms of this pizza making journey?
I think it's going to be just all about taking it to, kind of newer heights, try to push the limit of what the texture feels like with my pizza. And also at the same time, hopefully get it out there into the mouths and hands of people to, see if I can make something of it. I'd love to start to do some pop-ups to get out there and share my pizza. I think not only is it, a healthy thing, it's delicious, and I think people would really enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
I always just thought I was cooking it for me and my kids and my wife, but now I'm like getting such great feedback, and people are stopping by who are visiting Vegas and they're loving it. Like, no one's been like, this is disgusting, but really only in the past month have I really like developed this product, and I'm like, yeah, this is good stuff. Like, I want to see where it goes. So.